Shalom, my name is Yeshua Yaakov. I'm making this video from Jerusalem. It's for the Pittsburgh summit of the G-20, and it's about world sustainable growth. Needed now is a new macro model for achieving sustainable world growth, and there is only one. And that is Humanomics. Why? It's the post-collapse New East-West convergence model that develops the whole man for all men, quote unquote, full stop. This result derives from Humanomics' 4 programs. By developing and integrating man's anthropologic humanism and traditional spiritualism in culture-specific terms, very ambitious for the world. In its building, implementing, and operating new world-class global technological infrastructure based on Humanomics' macro model of the world's economy. It is the integration of labor that replaces the division of labor for the G20 locally and globally, achieving such sustainable growth. Paragraph. As only when such building is based on Humanomics, new central organizing principle of Klal Yisrael and mankind, that is receiving to give. That's its central organizing principle. Will this sustainable growth be attained, more particularly by producing a third macro sector in the US and G20 economies for, quote, human health, services, and well-being, quote unquote, that replaces the extreme institutional debt-ridden consumption model of housing and consumer spending that tanked in 2008, which is no longer viable. Paragraph. It was for this reason that in the early 1990s, this author called for a new world economic model for growth. It was ignored, to the peril of the nation 10 years later. A month after 9/11, the prediction of the collapse of the US, Japanese, and world economy was made, also by this author. And it too was ignored to the nation's peril. And that was right at the time that Stiglitz was receiving the Nobel Prize, which he claims that he predicted the collapse. Well, he predicted something else, but that's another matter. In this cognitive context, we're reminded of the law of that human actions affect all things in our world. It's a law as binding as any law of physics. We're all expected to accept, inhabit, and apply it. As man's failure to do so has profound existential implications for all mankind, as the global collapse of 2008 confirmed. Indeed. Paragraph. As herein man's palpable greed and fear, individual and institutionally, drove him to extreme irrational actions, as proved massively damaging to all mankind, while the feeble recent claims of restoration of the system's stability are delusional in the extreme, and are absolutely not to be believed, as this crisis can and probably will recur absent fundamental change. Paragraph. The trajectory is today man's redemption. And interestingly, this trajectory of mankind has been missed by the world's media. This perspective of the world's media is not only missing the essential major events of history, but many other things. The major event which confirms that the trajectory of mankind today as redemption is the fact of the collapse of the local reality globally that has ended man's exile. When understood, this explains why and what happened, and what prescription is now needed for man and mankind. Paragraph. Very briefly, man's local reality was his model of mind that was giving to receive, quote unquote. It began collapsing globally in 1990, first in Iraq and next in the former USSR, as communism collapsed, and was next repeated as communism collapsed in Yugoslavia, followed by a dozen other countries around the world. And this set the stage for what was/is the global collapse of countries around the world. And this set the stage for what was/is the global collapse of the world economy, as subsequently came to pass in 2000. And again, this could repeat absent an authentic in-depth solution. And there is only one solution, and it's Humanomics paragraph. The essential lesson from the collapse of man's model of mind of exile was giving to receive is it ended man's exile. As heaven removed the old to make way for the new, and it's now replaced with Humanomics' new central organizing principle of Klal Yisrael mankind, which is, in Hebrew, kabel b'shviltet, in English, receiving to give. Okay. And it's very significant, and I'm not going to talk more about that right now, but there's a whole video that should be made just about receiving to give. Paragraph. This global transformation of man and mankind, as is now in progress, is completely missing in the official narrative of governments globally, while it's to be noted that this process is irreversible. Why? Its vital prescription for all mankind is to all from God, from all according to God, quote unquote. I'll repeat that, to all from God and from all according to God, quote unquote, underscored. As this is why it's now the choice of all mankind, as is now being branded globally on the web as the authentic and only solution. About 100 million, 150 million links have been achieved so far on the web. Paragraph. While the participation model of Humanomics is based on its new model of economy, it is the integration of labor as attains a just and broad inclusive participation for all globally, as the LDCs now own the intellectual property, and the G20 for the G20 now realizing the world's now needed sustainable new growth model for today and the future. How is that so? Thank God, Baruch Hashem, I own the intellectual property. My wife and I decided that the world doesn't need another billionaire. So we put it in trust for the LDCs. So the G20 has to go to them to get the solution and share the wealth. That's how. And this is what ensures that there will be a just and equitable distribution of the world's economy's productive results and outputs without government redistribution. And this is what Australia's Prime Minister Rudd has been talking about when he called for a new model. Ireland's, the UK's, Canada's, and other PMs around the world are all now calling for. And they're to be lauded for the wisdom. Paragraph. While it's to be noted that the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Rudd's recent articulation calls for coordinated stimulus withdrawal from the G20, while making clear that the new model now needed must not be based upon, quote, huge debt-ridden consumption, quote unquote, parenthetically again, as was the old macro US model based on consumer spending and housing that collapsed under the debt burden of being owned by the G20's financial sector close. Implicitly, this means that a macro supply side investment approach is needed in world-class G20 new global technological infrastructure terms based on Humanomics' new macroeconomic model. Paragraph. And there is, again, only one new model. It's Humanomics in general, and it's receiving to give, and its new economic paradigm, the integration of labor in particular. I am its originator, owner, and author, and I approve this message. I'm Yeshua Yaakov from Jerusalem. Thank you for listening, and we hope you had a successful summit in Pittsburgh. Thank you so much.